Welcome, everybody. I'm joined by Scott Church, and we are here to address an important question. Why do most games fail? So, Scott, you run a store that sells dead CCGs out of print CCGs. You're an expert in this stuff. How many games do you have listed on your store?
We have over 160 various games right now. Probably about 120 of them we have singles for, and others we have just sealed product.
That's an insane inventory. Also, I appreciate you matching my gray shirt today. I'm glad you got the dress code of plain.
That's right. We are the dad rock shirts today. So
Absolutely. So, I've actually gone through and counted, and in the 90s, which I think is the golden era of card games, you had over 250 unique card games that came out, everything ranging from The Simpsons to Buffy to Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, which is technically 2001, but you had 250 different games. And of those 250, you basically have three left standing: Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon. And what happened to the other 247 of them is they all failed. And so that's the discussion I want to have today: is what happened and why do most games statistically fail, right? What goes on? So the first thing I had on my list, and this is something I want to kind of get at throughout the show, but you need to have players playing your games to succeed. And I think so many of these games don't have players, right? Is that something you've seen as well, Scott?
yeah, a big piece of that is either you're licensing a product, and so if you're doing that, you don't need the players as much as long as that license has enough fans to pull in a customer base. But if you're something like AEG that built like Warlords from scratch, or took role playing game properties like Seventh Sea and even built a world around Legends of the Five Rings, they had to create their whole setup for these games on their own and really have a player base for them. They weren't having these collectors coming in and dropping, thousands of dollars on cases just to have the Darth Vader card. They were having to hold events where people felt like they belonged. It was a lifestyle brand game where they were part of the clan. They're part of this group or that group. I think you're seeing that with One Piece right now, where that resonates with various fans of the anime, the Netflix show, whatever it may be, where people really like it and they're getting in on the game and they're playing it, they're enjoying it. There are some collectors for it, but they're getting a player base, and that's what's important.
Yeah, and so I think a successful card game, you look at the big three: Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, Pokemon. Man, I would not have, if you would have asked me in the 90s which one of those three, I was like, Yu-Gi-Oh, not Digimon. But they have three things in common: is they have a player base. No matter how much you might cringe at any of the gameplay of those games, they have a player base. They have hardcore collectors, and then they also have some people that view this as an investment or a way of, they're going to buy a booster box, hold on it for 20 years. They think of it like a gold bar. And no matter how much you might hate one group of those people, you need to have those three legs for the stool to stand up. If you're missing one of those, it's not going to work long term. Magic has people that collect full sets. It's just something that people do, and it's a nightmare with all the variations. They need to have a warehouse to store it, but they do, and they have people that also, collect it. They have a big player base, and they also have people that buy. I had a friend, he bought 3 of the Lord of the Rings sealed special edition Lord of the Rings set. He's like, I'm just gonna hold on to this and see where is that in 5 years. I'm like, okay. And historically, that's been pretty good for a lot of Magic stuff. You get the right price.
Right. And I mean, anything like Magic or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh, when you can last that long, your customer base becomes a next generation customer base, where you have kids that were teenagers that started playing these games that are now adults playing these games, and they're taking their teenagers to play with them, or they have a next group of players. So if you can last that long, it creates a whole nother group of collectors. I know people that collect Magic art and they hang it in their house like fine artwork because
Sure.
they love those pieces from their youth, or they get, they'll get tattoos of Magic pieces because it means something to them. And when
Right.
you get, oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, so much of this is about inertia, right? And I wouldn't think any of these three games are going to print because there's too many people that care about it. It's sort of a
Yeah.
perpetual motion machine that carries them forward, and culture forms around it, and sub communities and subreddits, all this sort of stuff is forming, and it's really hard to break that apart. What did you say to me before the show? With games, you have 3 years to beat the big three, otherwise you're toast. Is that sort of a good summary?
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing with game stores is they have space. They have a limited amount of space on their shelves and in their cases to show these games or amount of employee resources to pack and ship these games for online sales. So, like for example, I've got these games here behind me. These are various games that we sell on our site, but I'm not competing against all these new games coming out necessarily. And if you're a small store owner and you've got so much shelf space, do you want to put in, remove some Magic stuff that sells or Pokemon to put in a game that you're unsure of? And it's a risk for these new games to ever bring them in. So when you have a game like One Piece that's hot or Lorcana that's hot, where people are just buying it as soon as it comes in, it's not even taking up any shelf space because it's gone right away. And so you're not even having to adjust too much of what you're doing in that instance. But it's like, what are you removing? A game store is kind of like you have a certain amount of apples, and once you only have so much space for those apples. It's not like there's an unlimited supply like there is in a greater economy. And so you have so much space, and they just can't have everything for it. And how many games do they buy that die, and then they're stuck with dead product and they're clearancing it?
Yeah. You're reminding me of just something I read about the Super Bowl, where the Super Bowl, has 1,400 bathrooms, and it's all planned around the halftime rush because they wanted people to be out of the bathroom as quickly as possible so they can go buy things, right? And they want people to take up but putting those bathrooms in is taking away vendor space or whatever. But essentially, you want to have the maximum value per customer, and that's sort of like the model of having way too many freaking bathrooms. And then in the game store, you want to maximize your customer experience. Someone's coming in there, they're going to look at sleeves. That's a pretty high margin product, but cards lower margin. But what cards you can have out? Singles sell better than boxes. At least a higher margin. So I think it's definitely, and this also leads us to the point I wanted to raise, is running a card store, running a card company is really hard. And it's not a high margin business. You're not getting rich off of it. And there's a big opportunity cost of the hours you put in, right?
Yeah. So think about a store where, Rudy with Alpha Investments did a whole video on this. Like, you want to open a store, let's go over the economics. And he broke it down on a whiteboard. And it was something along the lines of, you make about $20 a booster box when it sells. And he's like, think how many booster boxes you have to sell every month to have, a $3,000 store rent, just for the rent aspect before employees and anything else, or paying yourself. So if you're only making $20 a booster box and you have a new set coming in, think how many boxes of this new game that you have to sell in order to make an impact. And where you make the most off of singles, that's generally your highest margin item. So if that new game comes out and you don't have enough of a player base that's picking up singles, and you're not able to buy and resell those singles quickly, it really is hard to deal with. And that's why most stores just stick with the ones they know that will sell. And it's hard to take on those new games unless you can start selling singles for it. You'll have an audience that's coming into play, all these various things. For example, I look at the game HeroClix, and there might be some people in your audience that will hate me for this, but HeroClix, I don't understand how it stays in business, because I've gone into so many stores and they have a huge wall of old HeroClix sets, and none of them move. Some of them are on clearance, and I'm like, who's buying this? What store's still buying HeroClix? And so unless you have a whale of a customer that comes in and just buys a ton of them, it's not really worth carrying for most stores, because it takes up more space because of the size. Selling singles takes up more space, and the prices drop almost instantly on singles as soon as they release, except for the really hard to find ones. And, getting those is really tough. So even for product that has been around for years, like HeroClix, I don't even understand why most stores carry it. And so it's almost like you have to be a hub store that you carry everything, and people know that you carry everything, to make it worth it for a game like that.
Yeah. Getting back to our broader question of why most games fail, I had a couple more things jotted down here. I'm going to kind of lump a few of these together, but bad marketing, licensing issues, and poor management. I think we were talking a little bit before the show about our most endangered TCG of 2024. And for me, I think it's Final Fantasy TCG, which if you didn't know there's a Final Fantasy card game, well, it's because Square Enix is terrible at marketing it, right? And it's not carried in stores, and it's one of these games that it could just slip away, and no one would really notice because there's no local tournaments. I live in a pretty big metro area, never seen it played anywhere, but it's a cool game. It's just poorly marketed. The management team doesn't seem to really care too much about it, and they don't have license issues, but it seems like that's a big problem for a lot of games is sort of the licensing. See Star Wars CCG, for example.
Yeah, that's such an interesting game. I mean, they had such a hot release for it. People were so interested, and Square just put no effort into it. It was really sad, and it's still sad to me to see today. And the interesting thing about it is they reused artwork for like around the first 7 sets. It wasn't even unique or new artwork. And finally, once they started putting new artwork into it, it saw a resurgence and people started having more interest in it, and it started selling better. But you can still find sets like 4 through 6 for $20 a box, $30 a box, just because no one cared for those sets. And so it's interesting. Like you said, it's almost pocketed groups for that game. There's a store that I follow out of California. I think it's called like Magitech Games. And they opened up and basically carry Final Fantasy as their main game, which is really weird. And they run huge tournaments for it. They're kind of like the California store for the game. They have a bunch of Japanese, video games and stuff there. It's a really cool store, but like you're saying, there's so many aspects. What's the marketing? What's the management team? I guess that's what killed off MetaZoo as part of the management team, as well as a licensing issue. I mean, if you think about Decipher, you have 3 top 10 selling games: Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, and a few other smaller ones that they made. They were huge in the 90s and early 2000s, and licensing was always an issue for them. I look at them and I'm like, what would they look like if they're still around today? They probably still wouldn't have those same games, but they'd be making other great games. There's a Matrix game that they could have made that was close to coming out. There's other games I'm sure that they would have loved to have made. And you see some of the cards that people make today, like the full art cards and different things. Like, what if Decipher could just remake some of their beautiful cards with new designs? It'd be so cool.
Right. No, I 100% agree. But going back to that licensing piece, it's a big problem because a lot of these deals as well are 5-year deals. In 5 years, you might get 10 sets out, maybe 12. And like Ravensburger might run into this issue with Lorcana. I don't know anything about their licensing deal, but Disney could just decide after 5 years, like, we want to go in a different direction. And it doesn't matter at all about the commercial success of the game. Maybe they just have a better, Wizards is suddenly interested or something. I don't know. This stuff just happens. And so licensing, if you're using real IP, there's always going to be an existential threat from licensing, right? And that's something that, Lorcana could see. Final Fantasy's just, man, that game also, they market it so strangely. It's like Opus 1, Opus 2, and I'm like, why can't you just have a Final Fantasy 7 set and it would sell out? Like, that game is coming out, part 2 is coming out, it's going to sell 10 million copies or something. There should be a card game that is exclusive to this or card set, and it will sell, I guarantee it. And they just don't seem to be capitalizing on that.
There's a Universes Beyond set coming out for Magic that's Final Fantasy based. So, I mean, they're undercutting their own product line by licensing it to someone else to make a card game out of it. And it's like, what are you doing? As far as that licensing goes, I mean, we've got the Star Wars Unlimited set that comes out next month in March, which I'm really excited for. And I don't know how much longer Fantasy Flight has a license for Star Wars related products. And what if Disney, that license comes up and they say, well, we want to throw that over to Ravensburger and have that be part of the Lorcana game. And that's a future set, as a Star Wars related set within Lorcana.
Right.
And then that, however long that game goes on, 1, 2, 3 years, it just ends because of a licensing issue.
Yeah, I think this goes into a good discussion about sort of the life cycle of games, right? Where a lot of games also fall into the traps of their own mechanics, where you had set 1, 2 that introduced cards that by set 7, 8 are broken, right? Because usually when you're planning set 1, you're not planning set 7 and how this might interact, and you quickly get into, you need to errata cards, you need to ban cards, and then people are upset. And I think it's just really hard to have a 5-year vision for a game when you don't even know if year one's going. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, basically by the third set, you kind of game companies usually know how they're going to do moving forward, if it's worth it to keep going or not. And usually by set 5 or 6, it's either time to readjust some of the rules because you become too bloated with your rule set, or you need to ban or restrict cards. The other thing that goes with this is, what's the power creep do? I mean, you look at all these. There's so many various factors with success in this. It's luck, timing. What's the market look like in competition times? Like if you're coming out when World of Warcraft was really big, the computer game, and everyone was staying home and playing that instead of going to card shops, you're just kind of dead on arrival. And so, and same thing with the 90s, you had some really good games made, but there was just so many games to wade through. So it's a really hard place to break into and make sure everything goes right. I look at Verse System, and Verse is such a good game, but they made sets that were really bad really early, and then they power creep from there. And so stores were left with dead product right away from that game. And you know what happens when you make stores mad and they no longer want to carry your product? It dies in your store, and then it dies everywhere.
Yeah.
And then also you have to price protect your items. Verse System was, you could buy boxes for $5 over wholesale online at the time that was released. I think Force of Will had that same issue where box prices were just so cheap online that it wasn't worth it for stores to carry it. And if they're not going to carry it, they're not going to support it with events. And then your game dies on release. You've got to price protect your items. You can't let wholesalers just sell it out the back door dirt cheap. I mean, when do you see Apple items discounted like that and they keep their value? If games keep their value, they retain interest. I mean, you're seeing this with Magic over the past
like
few
luxury
years.
products, right? It's like all the old Louis Vuitton purses that don't sell, they literally destroy because
Yeah.
they recognize this is a luxury good. And cards shouldn't be a luxury good. I think they should be affordable, and you should be able to find them and all that sort of stuff. But you cannot undercut yourself. And I think this brings us to one of the final points I want to make is exclusivity, which I think Flesh and Blood right now is going only to CCG player, which means it's not going to be in any local game stores, which is the heart of where people play. And I know local game stores are, going extinct a little bit, but that's still where nerds hang out. And ultimately, you need to have people playing this in your store and not, hey, what's that? Oh, where can I buy it? Only TCG player? Because already, if you're using TCG player, you're already kind of an advanced gamer, right?
Yeah.
And you need the noobs to really make up. You need people buying booster packs, not buying booster boxes from TCG player.
Well, and you have to cycle in new players, right? Like, think how many times how did you get started playing? It's generally like at a card store when you're a teenager and playing with friends, and then you go to a store and you start going to events. Like, you have to have, I mean, it's almost like the drug trade. Like, you have to have an entry point at some point for people, like, and you have to have local dealers. They can't just be, online only. It's a really interesting thing when I look at that. You can hold a few big events every year and get the same people attending them, but what happens when you stop doing money for those big events? And it's a really interesting business model. I just don't see it surviving.
Yeah. I think this brings us to one of the final points I wanted to make is this inherently is a hyper competitive and suffocating market, right? If you do not find a way of differentiating yourself from the big three, you're dead after 3 years. MetaZoo made it 4 years, right? And it sounds like there was some internal management issues, but that was a game that also had all the possible gas you could get, right? And perhaps it had, of those three, legs of the stool we talked about, the investors, collectors, and players, it had too big of a leg for the investors, right? And this is a game that like Steve Aoki's hyping, Rudy's hyping, and you should just be cautious if like a DJ is saying you should buy a card game. You should be like, okay, is this something I want to get into? And so I think they had a little bit too long of that investor leg, and no one was playing it, and no one was really collecting it. Everyone kind of like holding boxes, like, I promise you, bro, these are worth money. And it's just not a good space. You need to have someone utilizing your product. Otherwise, you're just going to get suffocated in this marketplace because it's so competitive. And people have short attention spans.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting talking to a lot of retailers. One Piece and Lorcana basically beat out. Magic was like had more sales volume, but they made more money overall off of those two games. Without, so I mean, you can look at that, and that's really a fascinating statistic. So I mean, I would not be shocked if Yu-Gi-Oh fell down to fourth this next year, and Lorcana beat it out. And I'll be curious to see if Pokemon can hold on to number two. But it's a tough market, and one of those things I was saying earlier, and we kind of mentioned, you have to, if you devalue your product, you lose customers. There has to be a collectability aspect to this as well. You want collectors that are looking for those high-end cars to get things graded, to hold on to for a while. You do need that aspect. Magic's hurting themselves over the last little bit by overprinting sets and dumping them on Amazon. People don't buy into that stuff. And so, with these new games coming out, you have to have a good mix of enough supply to meet demand, not shorting it too much, but also driving up interest. So that way you do have collectors that are trying to get into it.
Yeah, I do think companies have become a little too cute with the collecting aspect as well. Like Magic with all of the serialized stuff in the Lord of the Rings sets, and I think there's a Doctor Who. It's a little too much. Where I can't even keep track of all the Lord of the Rings cards in the Magic set that were serialized. I'm like, there's too many of them, and like alt arts, and I think they realize that people chase this stuff, and then they maybe overcorrect it a little bit. And it's like, well, do 400 or 500 people actually want a voice of Sauron, alternative 60s poster art? I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, I think that they thought that this is a way of tapping that collector market, and they might have kind of overplayed their hand a little bit. Like, you still need to have this stuff be chased, not like, how much is a dwarven ring worth? There's 900 of them. Do 900 people even want this at $1,000? I don't know.
Well, and we're talking also about physical games. I mean, I look at like what Marvel Snap is doing right now, and they have all these alternative art cards they release and the different colors and different. I mean, there's like something new every week you can spend $100 on. I mean, it's really crazy how much money they're probably making off of that game, and it's all digital. It's not physical at all. So it's interesting to me, like, how do you release games today and have it become popular physically when playing it easily on your phone is almost easier for most people? Like, I don't go to game stores a lot, but I play Marvel Snap a lot. It lets me still have a competitive gameplay without having to buy physical cards. I'm a free to play player on it. So it's a different thing. And so when you're creating a new game to be released now, you've really got to have something that reaches a lot of people, have good gameplay, get local stores to bought in, put in a lot of legwork. I mean, you hear these game companies from the 90s, they were traveling like roadshow style to game stores and setting up how to play events and demoing it. Where do you see that today? I've never seen that with Final Fantasy. I never saw that with Verse System. Like, these games have to get on boots on the ground to some degree and have ambassadors and have people really pushing it.
I 100% agree. And I think this is a good point to close out our discussion, but you need to have that hustle, right? You need to understand that this is a really tight market. And even though designing a game might have been your dream, or working for a game company, or owning a local game store, that doesn't matter. That there's only a certain amount of disposable income that people have set aside in their hobby budget. And it's not $5,000 a month for most people. It's maybe a couple $100, maybe less than $100. And you need to have products that span the gamut, but you also need to hustle and respect your customers and get out there and, hit the pavement a little bit. I would love to see Final Fantasy demo. And actually, I think Star Wars Unlimited is doing this. I will say, like, my local game store has a demo of Star Wars Unlimited this weekend. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go check that out. And they'll probably bring a little crowd of 60 to 70 people that all are going to buy that and evangelize about the game and, talk about it with their friends. That's what you need to do. You can't just take the sort of like lazy approach of the internet will disseminate information for me for free.
And you can't also be like, hey, my product will sell itself, like kind of Final Fantasy seems to think. I totally agree with you. Fantasy Flight took a lot of crap for how Star Wars Destiny came out, and it was underprinted. It was really popular right away. They did demo it. They did a good job. The big failure with that was they didn't get a play system in place really quickly for it. And so it kind of lost some popularity because of that. And so I think you're right. I think they took a lot of lessons from what they learned before, and they're hustling. I see people posting demo decks, that they received, for stores as well as online, where different influencers are receiving it, and they're posting about it and showing how to play it. I went online to see how to play it just the other day, and they spoiled most of the cards. People are printing them off and playing, with the spoiled version, so that way they can see decks that are good right away. I mean, how quickly we're getting to a meta for a game that hasn't even released yet is insane, and people are on top of it and doing it. And this is the new way it's done now, and so people are excited to play it right away, and I think that's a great thing.
People need to be excited. That's a good closing point. People need to be excited about your game. So why do games fail? I think we have bad marketing, we have licensing issues, poor management, no player base, or lacking collectors, or lacking even the investor piece, or frankly, a disproportionate number of people in each of those camps. You have problems with exclusivity. Can you find this stuff? And then finally, just failure to recognize that this is a really competitive marketplace and you gotta hustle. Otherwise, you're not going to win. And you're going to be on one of these Facebook groups for $20 a booster box. So, Scott, any final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is you got to have places to play. That's big to me. When I used to travel for work a lot, I'd carry around Magic decks with me, and I'd go to various stores. I also go play basketball. I'm a big basketball player, so I show up at like random rec centers and play. And you have to have that same concept with like a game. Like if I have Star Wars Unlimited, can I show up to that random store in Burbank and play? Can I show up to that random store in Ohio and play, or in Arlington, Texas? Like you have to be able to go into a local store and find other players for these games. Otherwise, the game's not going to survive, and that's a huge piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, thanks for hanging out, man. Maybe we're going to do a video on sort of the top 3 most endangered CCGs of 2024. That sounds like a fun idea.
Love it.
You got me thinking about other ones. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Like, subscribe, check out Category 1 Games. And Scott, if you want to pick up some of the games that we mentioned that are out of print, Scott's got all of them behind him and probably in 6 more rooms like that. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.